So another question for you tonight is, how many went to see the Dalai Lama when he was here? Can I see by hands? Just not so many. He was here yesterday, and at University of Maryland, and it's always wonderful to have the Dalai Lama just in the vicinity. His main teaching always in some way is that every one of us wants to be happy. Nobody wants to suffer. I remember in 2005 he was here for a conference, and that was the first year that there was a real sharing of how much science was showing the effect of meditation on mental health, on physical health. He had just come out with a book on happiness. Network News was interviewing him. The big question for him was, so what was the happiest moment of your life? That was their question. And he sat there and kind of gave that little mischievous look, and he said, I think now. And I love that story because, as we know, the whole training in meditation is to be able to arrive and come to the one place, right here, where it's possible to get in touch with loving presence, where it's possible to be creative, where it's possible to really find happiness and healing. And the really good news is this understanding is spreading. Just like people get it that exercise helps our body. This is, I don't know how many of you know, but this is called Mental Health Month. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but there's a mental health caucus on Capitol Hill, and so this is Mental Health Month, and they're paying a whole lot of attention to this research on the effects of mindfulness on addiction and on emotional healing. So much so that yesterday I taught a class on Capitol Hill for staff and legislators that they sponsored. They and Congressman Tim Ryan, because now they're beginning to do a regular class on Capitol Hill, a meditation class for those there. This is good news. Yeah, it's happy making, consciousness, you know. So the Buddha highlights a really great paradox that is what I want to explore tonight, which is that our happiness and freedom arises from what I'm calling presence, which is this awakeness, this openness right here. That's the source of our happiness. And yet, in our daily pursuit of happiness, we leave over and over again. We keep exiting, okay? You're all with me, I'm pretty sure on this. And it's tracked in Buddhist psychology to a basic perceptual misunderstanding, whereby we sense that our happiness depends on having life a certain way. We are conditioned in our pursuit of happiness to try to, when there's something pleasant, hold on to it or get more of it. And we're conditioned to think that if there's something unpleasant, we can't be happy, we have to get rid of it. In other words, our wiring is such that pleasantness and unpleasantness, which continually is happening, is a trigger to leave the present moment. So the one place where if we can learn to stay and open, we can end up finding the space and the freedom that really is what we're yearning for, we exit. Okay, so that's the paradox. And really, one of the ways to think about it is that as part of our survival equipment, these egos, our executor, have a kind of navigating system, and it's very much like other animals in the way that we reflexively move, away from unpleasantness and towards pleasantness, so that we're always trying to control our experience. And if you begin to investigate in moments of controlling your experience, or controlling other people, we do that too, we're not fully here. We've left. We've left our wholeness, we've left our being. So we do it a lot in a mental way. Most of us do it pretty continuously through our judging, our planning, our rehearsing, our mulling, our ways of obsessing. That's our primary way to try to control what's going to happen. We strive. We either strive or we procrastinate. But a lot of the times we're striving. The classic story of one Zen student goes to the monastery and he says, his basic question to the abbot is, well, how long will it take me to get enlightened? You know? And so the abbot says, 10 years. And then the question was, well, what if I try really hard? 20 years. Hey, wait a minute, you just said 10 years. For you, 30 years. You know? It's part of our survival equipment just to try hard, to try to get what we want. And you know, if you think of it, if our parents weren't intensely drawn towards seeking out pleasure, we wouldn't be here, right? And if we didn't try to avoid pain, we wouldn't be able to stick around long. So it's universal, but when we live in a continual reactivity, where we're constantly managing and controlling, it blocks out our capacity to love in a way that's visceral. We can have ideas of loving, but we are not in our body in the moment to really feel that tenderness. When we are constantly in that control mode, we're not able to perceive much about others. When we're in control mode, we are disconnected from our bodies. We're not feeling our belonging to the earth. We're really not able to perceive our very beingness. We're cut off from that background of awakeness and openness that's really our home. So what I want to explore tonight is this way we get cut off and caught in the doing, controlling kind of egoic mind, and the way we come back. And Buddhist psychology describes it, you know, that Buddha described a trance or a dream, that we're busy with our ideas of what it's going to make us happy and what's going to save us from harm, and we get very busy with it and take it very, very seriously, and we're a very important protagonist in the drama of how we're going to navigate each day. So we're in this kind of trance, and when we're in that trance, we have forgotten who we are, and that's the suffering. We are cut off from the beingness, the dimension of beingness that really is home. Now, the question then that's really central for all of us in our lives is, how do we wake up from that controlling ego that's overdoing? Because this isn't about not doing. I mean, activity's fine. It's the obsessive overdoing, the controlling, that keeps us cut off. So that's what we'll be exploring tonight, is going from this kind of overdoing to more of the quality of beingness in our life. And I'll share with you a really, really terrible joke. This is passed on by way of Jonathan. He says it's terrible too. So Socrates says, to be is to do. Sartre says, to do is to be. Sinatra croons, doobie, 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 doobie. Of course, there's Fred Flintstone too, right? You all know that one. Okay, so I just want to again say that we're going to explore moving from doing to being, but it doesn't mean a passive life. In fact, it's not like we're going to let the kids, forego anything creative and just get glued to the screen, and it doesn't mean that in some way we're going to give up exercising at the club. We can still be doing. The idea is this, that only by learning to rest in being, in that presence, does our activity come from a more enlightened, more wise, more compassionate place. So it's not stopping doing, it's doing from a place of wholeness. First place of attention for us as we explore really shifting the proportions in our life, because that's what I think of it as, is getting very familiar with our control strategies. And we all have them. I mean, every ego is navigating, and most of us have particular strategies that help us to feel more secure, that give us a temporary sense of pleasure or relief. They wouldn't work if they didn't give us something. And this is, if you think of it, it's very impersonal, our control strategies. Every mammal, every animal has them. And so we have a kind of complex version of what other animals and mammals do. And it all goes by operant conditioning. Most of you are familiar with the way operant conditioning goes, that these controlled behaviors, well, we do something, it brings us some reward. And then we do it again, and it brings us some reward. So we get habituated to it. It doesn't bring us ultimate happiness, it doesn't bring us ultimate love, but we get enough relief or enough pleasure for the moment that we're hooked. Okay? So what are they? Which are the strategies we're kind of hooked on that are hard to give up? So you think of a rat in a lab pushing a lever for pellets, right? So how are we pushing levers for pleasure? And you can see it, that we perform certain ways to get approval. We have to show off certain things. We kind of compulsively show off certain things about our lives to get others' approval. And we strive to accomplish, again, to feel better about ourselves. Or we inflate in some way to impress. Or we accommodate people to win their affection. We have all our different ways, and a lot of them have to do with consuming. Very across the board ways of consuming to soothe. In terms of food, using alcohol or drugs to either stimulate or sedate. One story, a man and a woman are in an airplane, and the woman takes out a tissue, she sneezes, gently wipes her nose, and then shudders quite violently for 10 to 15 seconds. A few minutes later, she does it again. She sneezes, pulls out tissue, wipes her nose, and shudders. Quite violently, actually. The man's becoming very curious about the shuddering. So when it happens one more time that she wipes her nose and shudders, he couldn't restrain his curiosity, and he asked her what was going on. He says, "You've sneezed 3 times, you've wiped your nose with a tissue, you shudder violently. Are you all right?" Her reply is, "I'm sorry if I disturbed you." She said, "I have a rare condition. When I sneeze, I have an orgasm." The man was a little embarrassed, but even more curious. He said, "I've never heard of that before. What are you taking for it?" And her response, "Pepper." So we push the lever over and over again for the pellets, and we get addicted to it, even if it's not really the pellets that we're ultimately looking for. We keep pushing in the same way. And then, of course, we have all our control strategies for defending, just the way a cat will bristle. We have ways of defending against harm or predators. We threaten, we criticize, we deceive, we withdraw. Our energies we withhold, we procrastinate, and of course we do a full throttle attack sometimes. So we have our strategies, and they kick into action when there's in some way some stimulus. It says, I'm threatened with something, or I have a chance of getting more of something. They swing into action. They swing into action when life does not cooperate in some way. So a lot of it's mental. The blaming, the self-validation, the grasping, the figuring. And as I said, if we get a temporary reward, we do it more. One of my favorite illustrations is of an elderly man who lives alone in New Jersey, and he wants to plant his annual tomato garden, but it's very difficult because the ground's really hard, and he's getting older. So his only son, Vincent, who used to help him with the garden, is in prison. So he writes a letter to his son. "Dear Vincent, I'm feeling pretty sad because it looks like I won't be able to plant my tomato garden this year. I'm just getting too old to be digging up a garden plot. I know if you were here, my troubles would be over. I know you'd be happy to dig the plot for me, like in the old days. Love, Papa." A few days later, he receives a letter from his son. "Dear Pop, don't dig up that garden. That's where the bodies are buried. Love, Vinny." At 4 a.m. the next morning, FBI agents and local police arrived. They dig up the entire area without finding any bodies. They apologize to the old man and they leave. The same day, the old man receives another letter from his son. Dear Pop, go ahead and plant the tomatoes now. That's the best I could do under the circumstances. Love you, Vinny. So when it works, when our strategizing and our manipulating or our controlling or our figuring works, it's like we keep doing it. Now the suffering is when we're addicted to it. When it takes up the big swaths of our life that we're trying to make things happen, and there's really no arriving in presence. And you can think through today. I mean, just reflect for a moment of what today was like. And certainly you'll notice that there were naturally things that you needed to do as part of your responsibilities. It's all, much of it's, wholesome, natural activity, whether we're feeding ourselves or others or doing our job at work. But how much was the mind off in planning ahead or figuring or judging or criticizing or whatever it is in an unnecessary way? How often were you able to just let go of the doing and be here for whatever was in the moment in your body or your heart or with someone else, really listening? When we scan, we often find that we kind of tumble forward through time, that we're rarely pausing and really arriving. We might have our meditation period, and then we're trying to do it formally, but then we get into the day, and it's mostly we're on our way somewhere. We're trying to get something done, or we're, thinking about what just happened, but here-ness, not so often. So when we're addicted, it causes trouble. It prevents us from really being in touch with who we are, and it ends up causing violence, because when we have fear in our system, our way of controlling ends up becoming such that we injure ourselves or others. Doesn't bring happiness. We end up in a chain reaction where we're not at home. And I like this description of how it happens in the biggest way. This is Kurt Vonnegut. And in the novel, one of his novels, man sitting watching television, watching a movie from World War II. Those endless black and white movies from World War II. But in this one, someone's put the reel on backwards, and he's there and he's sitting, and this is how it looks to him. Okay? American planes full of holes and wounded men and corpses take off backwards from an airfield in England. Over France, a few German fighter planes flew at them backwards and sucked bullets and shell fragments from some of the planes and crewmen. They did the same for the wrecked American bombers on the ground, and those planes flew up backwards to join the formation. The formation flew backwards over a German city that was in flames. The bombers opened their bomb bay doors, exerted miraculous magnetism which shrunk the fires, gathered them into cylindrical steel containers, and lifted the containers by magic into the bellies of the planes. The containers were stored neatly in racks, but there were still a few wounded Americans, and some of the bombers were in bad repair. Over France, though, German fighters came up again and made everything and everybody as good as new. When the bombers got back to their base, the steel cylinders were taken from their racks and shipped back to the United States, where factories were operating day and night, dismantling the cylinders, separating the dangerous contents into minerals. Touchingly, it was mainly women who did this work. The minerals were then shipped to specialists in remote areas. It was their business to put them into the ground and hide them cleverly, so they would never hurt anybody ever again. When we look at it globally, we can see the the horror that happens, that comes out of this basic fear conditioning, the conditioning to grasp, and we can see how it leads to war, how it leads to devastating our Earth's environment. We can see the results of these control strategies that humans have when they go awry and we get addicted. So the question is, how do we undo? How do we put the film on backwards, and so we end up putting it back into the earth in a way that's safe, that's healed, so we can be at peace. And so I'd like to take the rest of tonight to really explore how we can move from that chain of reactivity where we're doing and controlling, and be able to touch into that beingness where we really can live from the kind of wisdom and compassion that brings healing to ourselves and each other. And I'll do it in two pieces. And the first is how, when we're in the thick of it, when we're in doer mode and it's coming from a fearful place, we're just in our activity, how do we learn to pause and touch into that beingness? What motivates us? And the second part is when we're not in the grip, how do we get more familiar with beingness? For many of us, it's just not part of our habit to pause and just arrive. How do we have that pathway become more alive and easy and available? So part one, when we're kind of caught in the thick, and I'll share with you what one woman, this is Judith Durek, this is excerpted from Circle of Stones. She says, the balance between doing and being is the most important and dangerous question. If I'm guilted or lured into achieving too much and lose the stillness at my center, then it takes a long time to regain it. My foot taps, I swallow food whole, I spill the coffee as I pour it, I burn myself on the stove. There's a violence that takes over every act. I am finding that it takes a lot of time to be a human being, to have a feeling of space and breath, a chance to sink into myself. As long as I take time every morning to light a candle to my life, it remains my life. But if I hurry into work without that small moment of quiet, then I've already lost myself and the day. So finding this balance. The first step is that has to matter to us. In other words, there has to be something in us that starts getting that our habitual ways of moving through the day, where we overdo or overthink or overjudge or whatever our strategy is with others to have them cooperate with us, is actually interfering with our capacity to have love relationships with others and with ourselves. It's interfering it's like that idea that life is a problem to be solved rather than a mystery to be lived. We lose our life, as Judith says. So the first step is having it matter, because we will not pause in the midst of things and begin to try to find our way back to presence if we don't get that being caught in the controller, being identified with the controller, is actually blocking us from really living a life that's fulfilled. We have to get that. So for many of us, it has to be stark. Like we really hit bottom in an addiction and we get the controller that's keeping us addicted is really harming us. Or it's a failed relationship. We really, all of a sudden our partner says, it's not working. And we realize that for the last 15 years, our tension and our way of controlling things has blocked any spontaneity or real flowering of the relationship. Or it might be physically that the controller, which is really stress-driven, has parts of our body break down. Or emotionally, we realize we're spending our whole day anxious. Now for me, many versions of the controller, but it became most stark, of course, when I got sick, and the controller made a wild grab for power, trying to, do my main ones, like obsessing about how I could, work this out and find my way to health and what was wrong, and judging myself for not taking care of myself. And, this is the controlling self, trying to manage things. And I got pretty motivated when I realized that the sickness kept going and the controller wasn't helping, and I was giving my life over to, obsessing and judging and struggling with it. So kind of came to a peak. At one point, I ended up in a cardiac unit at Fairfax Hospital right here for about 5 days, and they didn't know what was wrong with me, and no one could diagnose it. So it was because, if we have in our daily life, we've got so much to do that there's often not time to sit back and say, wow, the controller's active. I think I'm going to pause and check this out. If you're in the hospital for 5 days, you got plenty of time. So this was my retreat on hanging out with the controller. And, I'd notice how over and over again my mind would start harping on, I'm going to have to find substitutes for the Wednesday night class. I'm going to have to cancel that retreat. Should I be seeing another doctor to check out this? It's like I was going and going, and something in me would say, okay, it's the controller, stop. And so I would start, the mantra I used, which was Chogyam Trungpa, Tibetan teacher, advises us to, when stuff's going on, to keep on meeting our edge and softening. He says, meet your edge, the edge being where it's really hard or difficult, where you're struggling, where you're caught. And then just soften. And soften means that you're recognizing what's happening, but you're just making room for it. Now, this is the diametric opposite to the controller, who doesn't want to meet the edge, wants to run in the other direction, and doesn't want to soften, wants to manage everything, right? So this is like counter-conditioning. This is turning the film and running it backwards. Does that make sense? Okay. That became the practice. Every time, the controller, okay, I try to meet my edge and soften. I found that it would work. I'd do it for a bit. Controller would come back. And I started catching on that it was okay, that it wasn't working for once and for all. And I want to share that because it takes a lot of patience. These patterns are really deep. But because I had a lot of time to keep on noticing and saying, okay, stop, soften, it became really interesting. I'd soften, I'd start opening, and what I had to open to, it wasn't like, open to presence. It was like open to the raw fear that I was running from, right? So it's hard to, you have to be motivated, because when you open into presence, it's not necessarily peaceful, blissful presence. It's the very thing you're running from. So then the practice really is meet your edge and soften and learn to stay some. Don't leave too quickly. What helped me a lot in this meeting my edge and softening and staying, was I would say, stop, just be here, and I'd add the word sweetheart. I'd say, it's okay, sweetheart. And just that touch of kindness. So it's meet your edge, soften, touch of kindness, actually was what kind of gave me the room and the ease to just stay with it. And as I did towards the last day or two, this is kind of what I want to share, is I started getting more familiar and more at home with that sense of just being with what's there, that space, kind of tender, some agitation on the surface, than the controller. The controller was more and more like this character in a movie that I would kind of be smiling wryly at and saying, okay, here it is again. It's not like the enemy. It's just the ego doing its thing, but overdoing it. So you can't make war on the controller. The controller loves it when you make war on the controller. It just gets more tough. It's really meet your edge, soften, it's okay, sweetheart, or whatever your language or gesture is for kindness. And we begin to have a bit more space. We start becoming at home in who we are as a being, rather than the small self as a controller. So in the Buddhist psychology, this is described as waking up from the trance, because the trance is when we're identified as the controlling self. Does that make sense? It's a kind of narrow sliver of what we are. And the waking up is, oh, okay, so there's this space of awareness, of kindness, that's noticing the controller but not caught inside. Okay, let's practice this part one together, okay? So you might close your eyes and take a moment to connect with your senses. So that might mean listening to the sounds that are here. Bringing your awareness into your body so that you can feel where there might be habitual tightness and let go a little. And take a nice full breath. And maybe another one. And reflecting now, you might sense for yourself where in your life there's a situation where in some way life's not cooperating, or you're not cooperating, but there's stress. A situation where you know that the controlling, doing part of you really leaps into action. And it might be that in some way you notice how the wanting is strong in those situations, or the craving or the fearing is strong. And what's your strategy then? What's your control strategy? You might sense that you get busy, are frenetically busy. You might sense that you start thinking compulsively. Maybe your controller turns to judging. That's probably the most common and popular strategy. Maybe in those situations you get very controlling or of others, threatening others, trying to get others to do what you want, guilting others. Just sense in a stressful situation how the controller is behaving. And see if you can sense the effect of it, the suffering of it, how by getting caught in the controller, there's more separation from yourself. Separation from others. How easy it is to cause harm. How much we miss out on. Not to add another layer of judgment, not to add the second arrow, but rather to just with honesty and gentleness observe the effect, the repercussions of being identified as the controller and getting caught in the controller, so that you can sense what you really wish. Just sense your heart's aspiration when you see that. You might sense it in whatever language works for you, that in some way there be some waking up from the controlling self, some touching into beingness, into your heart, into your consciousness. That you can undo some of that patterning. Just sense your intention to wake up in whatever way is natural for you. And just for a couple more moments, now just let yourself enter the situation as well as you can. Imagine kind of transplanting yourself right into it, where you get most stressed, most reactive, most caught in the controlling self. And make it as real and vivid, just for the sake of this reflection. See if there's others involved, what they're doing, what they're saying, the looks on their face. Sense what's provoking you, what the situation is, what you're afraid is going to happen. Let yourself be really aware of what you believe or fear is going to happen, what's going to go wrong. And sense the possibility of pausing in the midst of that situation. Just run through it in your mind, your body, your heart, that you could pause. And just sense what it would be like if you could have a timeout where you can pause and explore this meeting your edge and softening. Explore staying right here and breathing with what's going on in your body and your heart. So that you're just taking a time out, instead of doing whatever the behavior is, you're pausing and just connecting with what's actually going on inside you. You might offer a message of kindness to see what happens if you offer a message of kindness, or if you want to just gently put your hand on your heart. So that you're experimenting with kind of, just the way in Vonnegut's story, like unrolling or undoing the habit pattern. Instead of the controlling behavior, pausing, meeting your edge, softening, offering kindness inside. Let yourself detect the presence that's here, that we miss out on when we're in our actions, in our addictive, controlling behavior, but the presence, the beingness in the background, right here. Let yourself rest and sense who you are in a deeper way, when instead of acting on the impulse, you pause. And you bring attention to your life right here. You can take it deeper as you listen to these words of this poem from Dana Falls. She says, settle in the here and now. Just settle in the here and now. You can just rest. Reach down into the center where the world is not spinning, and drink this holy peace. Feel relief flood into every cell. Nothing to do, nothing to be but what you are already. Nothing to receive but what flows effortlessly from the mystery into form. Nothing to run from or run toward. Just this breath, awareness knowing itself as embodiment. Just this breath, awareness waking up to truth. Settle in the here and now. Reach down into the center where the world is not spinning and drink this holy peace. Okay, opening your eyes.